At the beginning of this video, I want you to pause for a moment, not to follow instructions, not to react automatically, but to truly notice something important. Today is not just another ordinary day. Most people wake up, grab their phone, scroll without thinking and move through their routine on autopilot, but you did something different. You chose to click on this video, and that choice matters more than you think. You might not even be fully aware of why you are here. Maybe you are searching for a change. Maybe you are tired of repeating the same patterns. Or maybe there is a quiet feeling inside you telling you that something in your life needs to shift. Whatever the reason is, it brought you here, and that is where everything begins. I do not believe in coincidence. If you are listening to these words right now, then you are exactly where you need to be. And more importantly, you are ready even if you are unsure, even if you are hesitant, even if a part of you is still holding back. Readiness does not always feel like confidence. Sometimes it feels like discomfort, like restlessness, like a question that will not go away. Be honest with yourself for a second. Have there been days when you felt like you were doing everything you could, yet nothing seemed to change? Times when you looked around and felt like everyone else was moving forward while you were standing still? Nights when you lay in bed exhausted, but your mind kept running, replaying conversations, worrying about the future, questioning your decisions? If any of that sounds familiar, then listen carefully. Because what you need right now is not empty motivation. It is not another temporary boost that fades away after a few hours. What you need is a different way of seeing your life. A deeper understanding of what is really happening beneath the surface. And most importantly, a shift in the way you act from this moment forward. There is a truth that most people overlook. Your life does not change someday in the future. It changes in the moment you decide to see things differently. Not when you have more money. Not when you finally get the opportunity you have been waiting for. But when you take control of how you respond to what is already in front of you. Think about your mornings. Every single day you wake up with two choices. The first is to let the day unfold exactly like the ones before it. You follow the same routine, think the same thoughts, react the same way, and end up with the same results. Nothing really shifts. Time passes, but your direction stays the same. The second choice is more uncomfortable, but it is also where change begins. It is when you pause even briefly and ask yourself one simple question. What am I going to do differently today? Not something dramatic, not something overwhelming. Just one small change. Maybe you focus more deeply on one task. Maybe you speak more honestly in a conversation. Maybe you stop delaying something you have been avoiding for far too long. It sounds simple, but do not underestimate it. Small changes, repeated consistently, are what shape an entirely different future. The problem is that most people do not stay consistent long enough to see the results. They try for a few days, maybe a week, and when nothing significant happens, they assume it is not working. Then they fall back into their old patterns, and the cycle continues. Imagine this for a moment. You are standing in front of a closed door. You have knocked on it again and again, but no one has answered. After a while, you begin to doubt whether there is anything behind it at all. You start to believe that maybe that door was never meant for you, so you stop knocking. But what if the door was about to open? What if it only required one more attempt? The truth is, many people walk away right before something finally shifts. Not because they lack ability, but because they lose belief. And once belief fades, action disappears with it. Here is something you need to understand. Just because you do not see results immediately does not mean nothing is happening. There are processes taking place that you cannot see yet. Think about a seed planted in the ground. For a long time, there is no visible change, no movement, no growth above the surface. But that does not mean the seed is dead. It is developing roots. It is preparing. It is building the foundation it needs before it can break through. Your life works the same way. You may have been putting in effort quietly, carrying pressure that no one else fully understands, continuing forward even when you felt like giving up. And right now, you might be in a phase where nothing seems to be paying off. But that does not mean you are on the wrong path. The real danger is not lack of progress. It is changing direction too quickly. Trying one thing for a short time, then abandoning it, moving to something else, then abandoning that too. Over time, you never go far enough in any direction to create meaningful results. This is where many people get stuck without realizing it. They confuse patience with failure. They mistake slow progress for no progress. And because of that, they interrupt their own growth again and again. I am not saying you should blindly stick to something that clearly is not working. But there is a difference between adjusting your approach and quitting because you are uncomfortable with the waiting. One is strategic. The other is emotional. And if you cannot tell the difference, you will keep resetting your own progress. Now bring your focus back to yourself. If you look at the recent period of your life, you will probably notice something important. It is not that you have not been trying, you have. But maybe your effort has not been consistent. Or maybe it has been scattered, divided across too many directions. And that is exactly what needs to change. Because from this moment forward, this is not about doing more. It is about doing things differently. It is about being intentional instead of reactive. It is about staying long enough in one direction to actually see what happens when you do not quit early. And as we continue, I'm going to show you something that most people never fully understand. Something that quietly determines whether you stay stuck or finally move forward. But before we go deeper, there is one thing you need to decide right now. Are you willing to stay, to listen, and to actually apply what you're about to hear? Because if you are, then what comes next is going to change the way you see everything. Before we move any further, I want you to stay with me for a moment and take this seriously. Not as background noise, not as something you casually listen to while doing something else, but as something that might actually shift the direction of your life if you let it. Because what we're about to talk about is the reason why most people never break out of the cycle they are stuck in. It is not because they are lazy. It is not because they lack intelligence. And it is not because they do not want success badly enough. The real reason is much quieter, much deeper, and much harder to notice. It is the way they think without realizing they are thinking that way. Most people believe their biggest obstacle is outside of them. They point to circumstances, to other people, to lack of opportunities, to bad timing. And while those things can be real, they are rarely the deciding factor. What actually shapes your life day after day is the internal pattern you repeat without questioning it. Let me explain this clearly. Every single day, you are running a script in your mind. A set of beliefs, assumptions, and expectations that quietly influence every decision you make. This script tells you what you think you are capable of, what you think you deserve, what you think is possible for you. And the problem is, most of this script was not consciously chosen. It was built over time. From past experiences, from failures, from what people said to you, from moments that made you doubt yourself. Little by little, without noticing, you started forming conclusions. Maybe you told yourself that you are not good enough. Maybe you decided that things never work out for you. Maybe you began to believe that no matter how hard you try, something will always go wrong. And once those beliefs settle in, they start shaping your behavior in ways you do not even notice. You hesitate when you should move forward. You overthink when you should act. You hold back when you should speak. Not because you consciously choose to, but because your mind is trying to protect you from disappointment, from failure, from discomfort. But here is the truth you need to hear. The same system that is trying to protect you is also keeping you stuck. Because growth does not happen inside comfort. It does not happen when everything feels safe and predictable. It happens when you step into uncertainty, when you do something that feels unfamiliar, when you risk not getting it right. And if your internal script is constantly pulling you back into what feels safe, then no matter how many strategies you learn, no matter how many videos you watch, you will keep returning to the same place. This is why some people seem to know exactly what to do, yet never do it. They have the information, they have the knowledge, but they cannot translate it into consistent action because their internal pattern is stronger than their external intention. Now, I want you to reflect on something. Think about a situation where you knew what you should do, but you did not do it. Not because you were incapable, but because something inside you resisted. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was doubt. Maybe it was just a feeling of not wanting to deal with it. That moment right there is the gap between who you are and who you could become. And most people live their entire lives inside that gap without ever closing it. So the question becomes, how do you change that? How do you break a pattern that has been running for so long that it feels automatic? The first step is awareness. but not the kind of awareness where you just notice it once and move on. I mean real awareness, the kind where you catch yourself in the middle of the pattern. When you start overthinking, you notice it. When you start doubting yourself, you recognize it. When you feel the urge to avoid something important, you pause and ask yourself why. Not to judge yourself, not to criticize yourself, but to interrupt the automatic response. Because once you interrupt it, even for a second, you create a space. And inside that space, you have a choice. You can go back to the old pattern, or you can choose a different response. And at first, that choice will feel uncomfortable. It will feel unnatural. It will feel like you are forcing something that does not belong to you. That is normal, because you are stepping outside of what your mind is used to. But if you repeat that process again and again, something starts to change. The new response becomes a little easier. The hesitation becomes a little weaker. The gap between intention and action starts to shrink. And this is where most people make another mistake. They expect this process to be fast. They want immediate transformation. They want to feel different right away. They want proof that it is working. But real change does not announce itself like that. It happens quietly, gradually, almost invisibly. One day, you handle a situation slightly better than before. Another day, you take action a little faster. Another day, you do not overthink as much. These are small shifts, but they are not random. They are signs that something inside you is being rewired. The problem is, if you are not paying attention, you will miss them. And if you miss them, you will assume nothing is changing even when it is. That is why consistency matters more than intensity. You do not need to completely transform your life overnight. You need to show up repeatedly with a slightly better response than yesterday. Now, let me take this even deeper. There is another layer to this that most people never address. It is not just about changing your actions, it is about changing your identity. Because at the end of the day, you do not act based on what you want. You act based on who you believe you are. If you see yourself as someone who always struggles, you will find ways to confirm that belief. If you see yourself as someone who gives up easily, you will repeat that pattern. Not intentionally, but subconsciously. On the other hand, if you begin to shift the way you see yourself, even slightly, your behavior starts to follow. This does not mean lying to yourself or pretending to be something you are not. It means recognizing that who you are is not fixed. It is something that is constantly being shaped by your actions. Every time you do something different, even something small, you are sending a signal to your mind. You are telling yourself, this is who I am becoming. And over time, those signals accumulate. They build a new identity, one that supports the direction you want to go instead of pulling you back. So as you listen to this, I want you to ask yourself a simple but powerful question. Who am I becoming through my daily actions? Not who you want to be in theory, not who you imagine yourself as in the future, but who you are actually becoming based on what you do every day. Because that answer will tell you everything. And in the next part, we're going to go even deeper into how your environment, the people around you, and the way you structure your daily life either reinforce your old patterns or help you break free from them. And once you see that clearly, you will understand why some people change faster than others, even when they start from the same place. Now that you have started to see how your internal patterns shape your actions, we need to go one level deeper. Because even if you begin to change the way you think, there is another force that quietly pulls you back into your old habits without you realizing it. That force is your environment. Most people underestimate how much their surroundings influence them. They think everything comes down to willpower, discipline, and motivation. But the truth is, your environment often decides your behavior before you even have a chance to think about it. Look at your daily life for a moment. The places you spend time in, the people you interact with, the content you consume, the routines you follow. All of these things are constantly sending signals to your mind about what is normal, what is acceptable, and what is expected. And over time, you start to align yourself with those signals. If you are surrounded by distraction, you become more distracted. If you are surrounded by negativity, your thinking becomes more negative. If you are constantly exposed to people who settle for less, who complain, who avoid responsibility, you slowly begin to adopt the same patterns, even if you once had a different mindset. This does not happen suddenly. It happens gradually, almost invisibly. That is why many people feel stuck even when they are trying to improve. They change their intentions, but they stay in the same environment that keeps reinforcing their old behavior. It is like trying to move forward while something is quietly pulling you backward at the same time. Now, I want you to consider something carefully. If you truly want your life to change, you cannot rely on motivation alone. You have to design your environment in a way that supports the person you are trying to become. This does not mean you need to completely change your life overnight. It means you start making small intentional adjustments that reduce friction for the right actions and increase friction for the wrong ones. For example, think about how easy it is to get distracted. Your phone is always within reach. Notifications are constantly pulling your attention. You tell yourself you will focus, but within minutes, you find yourself scrolling without even thinking about it. That is not a lack of discipline. That is an environment designed for distraction. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine creating a space where focus becomes easier, where distractions are limited, where the things you need to do are right in front of you, and the things that pull you away are harder to access. Suddenly you are not fighting yourself as much. You are working with your environment instead of against it. This principle applies to every area of your life. If you want to think differently, you have to be careful about what you consume. The information you take in every day shapes your perception more than you realize. If you constantly feed your mind with negativity, fear, and comparison, it becomes harder to maintain clarity and confidence. On the other hand, if you intentionally choose content that challenges you, that expands your thinking, that reminds you of what is possible, your mindset begins to shift naturally. But environment is not just about physical space or digital input. It is also about people. The conversations you have, the attitudes you are exposed to, the expectations that are placed around you, these things matter more than most people admit. If you are constantly around people who doubt themselves, who avoid growth, who stay in their comfort zone, you will feel pressure, even if it is unspoken, to stay the same. Not because they are trying to hold you back, but because change disrupts what feels familiar. At the same time, when you are around people who are focused, who take action, who are willing to grow, something different happens. Their behavior becomes a reference point. It shows you what is possible, and it raises your standard without forcing you. This is why some people seem to improve faster than others. It is not always because they are more talented or more disciplined. It is because they are in an environment that constantly reinforces the direction they want to go. Now, here is where it becomes important for you. You may not be able to change everything around you immediately. You may not be able to choose your workplace, your family situation, or certain responsibilities, but you still have more control than you think. You can choose what you consume. You can choose how you structure your time. You can choose who you listen to and who you take seriously. You can choose to create small pockets of space in your day where you are aligned with the person you are trying to become. And those small pockets matter, because over time they expand. What starts as a few minutes of intentional focus can become an hour. What starts as a small shift in your routine can become a completely different lifestyle. What starts as one new influence can lead you to an entirely new circle of people. But it begins with awareness. You have to start noticing what is helping you move forward and what is quietly keeping you in place. And here is something that might challenge you. Sometimes the things that are keeping you stuck are the things that feel the most comfortable. The habits you are used to, the conversations that require no effort, the routines that do not demand anything from you. They feel easy, familiar, safe. But comfort can be misleading, because what feels comfortable in the moment is not always what moves you forward in the long term. And if you are not careful, you can spend years inside that comfort without realizing how much it is limiting you. So the real question is not just what do you want to achieve. It is what kind of environment are you willing to create to support that goal. Because your results are not just a product of your effort. They are a product of the system you live in every day. And once you understand that, you stop blaming yourself for everything and you start making smarter adjustments that actually lead to change. Now, as we move into the next part, we are going to bring everything together. Your mindset, your actions, your environment. And we're going to talk about something that ties all of this into one powerful shift. Something that determines whether you stay in the same cycle or finally break through it. Because there is one factor that most people ignore, even when they are doing everything else right. And once you see it clearly, you will never approach your life the same way again. Now we're going to connect everything you have heard so far into one clear direction. Because understanding your thoughts and adjusting your environment is only part of the process. There is one more element that determines whether all of this turns into real change or just remains as ideas that sound good but never translate into results. That element is execution over time. Not one day, not one burst of motivation, not one moment where everything feels clear. What truly changes your life is what you do repeatedly when the feeling is gone, when the excitement fades, when no one is watching, and when nothing seems to be happening. This is where most people fall off. They start strong, they feel inspired, they decide this is the moment everything changes. For a few days, maybe even a week, they act differently. They focus more, they try harder, they stay disciplined, but then something happens. They get tired, they get distracted, they miss one day, then another, and slowly, without realizing it, they drift back to where they started. Not because they are incapable, but because they relied on a temporary state instead of building a sustainable system. You have to understand this clearly. Motivation is a spark, not a structure. It can get you started, but it cannot carry you through the entire journey. If you depend on feeling motivated every day, you will constantly be starting over, and starting over is exhausting. What you need instead is a way of operating that does not depend on how you feel. This is where discipline is often misunderstood. People think discipline means forcing yourself to do things you hate. But real discipline is not about force, it is about alignment. It is about making your actions so clear, so simple, and so consistent that you remove the need to negotiate with yourself every day. Because every time you have to decide whether to do something or not, you create an opportunity to avoid it. Think about how much energy is wasted in hesitation. You know you should do something, but instead of doing it, you think about it, you weigh the options, you delay, you tell yourself you will start later. And by the time you finally act, if you act at all, you have already drained the energy you needed. Now imagine a different approach. Instead of asking yourself every day whether you feel like doing something, you decide in advance what you will do, when you will do it, and how you will start. You remove the decision, you remove the debate, you follow the structure you created. This is what separates people who move forward from those who stay stuck. It is not that they always feel motivated. It is that they have reduced the number of decisions that can pull them off track. Let me make this even more practical. If you want to change your life, you need to focus on actions that are small enough to repeat, but meaningful enough to move you forward. Not extreme changes that you cannot sustain, but consistent actions that you can maintain even on your worst days. Because the real test is not what you do when everything is going well. It is what you do when you are tired, when you are stressed, when you do not feel like trying. If your system only works when you feel good, it is not a system. It is a temporary boost. And this is where identity, environment, and action come together. You begin to act in alignment with the person you are becoming. You place yourself in an environment that supports those actions. And you repeat those actions long enough for them to become automatic. At first, it will feel forced. You will have moments where you question whether it is worth it. You will have days where it feels like nothing is changing. You might even feel like you are going backward. That is part of the process. Because you are not just changing what you do. You are changing what feels normal to you. And that takes time. But here is the part that most people never reach because they quit too early. There comes a point where the effort starts to feel natural. Where the actions you once resisted become part of your routine. Where the gap between what you intend to do and what you actually do becomes smaller and smaller. And once that happens, something shifts. You stop fighting yourself. You stop relying on external pushes. You begin to move forward with less resistance. That is when progress becomes real. Not because everything suddenly becomes easy, but because you have built a foundation that can support your growth. Now, I want you to think about where you are right now. Not where you want to be, not where you think you should be, but where you actually are. What are the actions you repeat every day? What are the patterns that define your routine? What are the choices you make without thinking? Because those are the things shaping your future, not your intentions, not your plans, not your goals, your repeated actions. And if you want a different outcome, you do not need a completely different life overnight. You need a different set of repeated actions applied consistently over time. This is where everything becomes simple, but not easy. Simple because the formula is clear. Not easy because it requires you to stay committed even when there is no immediate reward. But if you stay with it, if you continue to apply what you have learned, if you keep adjusting your environment, your mindset and your actions, something will change. Not all at once, but steadily. And in the final part, we're going to bring all of this together into one clear realization that will determine whether you actually follow through or fall back into your old patterns. Because there is one final shift you need to make. And once you make it, everything else begins to align. Now we arrive at the final piece. The part that quietly determines whether everything you have heard in this video becomes something real in your life or just another idea that fades away after today. Because at this point, you understand something most people overlook. You understand that change is not about one big decision, but about small actions repeated over time. You understand that your thoughts shape your behavior, that your environment reinforces your habits, and that consistency matters more than temporary motivation. But there is still one question left. Why do people who understand all of this still go back to their old patterns? The answer is simple, but not easy to accept. It is because they never fully commit. Not in words, not in intention, but in a way that removes the option to return to what is comfortable. Most people live in a constant state of partial commitment. They try, but they keep an escape route. They start, but they allow themselves to stop. They move forward, but only as long as it feels manageable. And because of that, the moment things become difficult, the moment discomfort appears, they go back to what feels familiar. This is the cycle. You feel inspired, you take action, you face resistance, you slow down, you stop, and then you start again later, over and over. Breaking this cycle requires a different approach. It requires a decision that is deeper than motivation. A decision that is not based on how you feel today, but on who you are choosing to become regardless of how you feel. This is what real commitment looks like. It is quiet, it is not dramatic, it does not need to be announced. It is simply a line you draw for yourself where you decide that certain actions are no longer optional. Not because you are forcing yourself, but because you understand that every time you avoid them, you are reinforcing the version of yourself you are trying to leave behind. Let me say that again in a way that stays with you. Every action you take is a vote for the person you are becoming. When you follow through, even when it is uncomfortable, you are voting for growth. When you avoid, delay, or quit, you are voting for the same patterns that have kept you where you are. And over time, those votes add up. They create a direction. They create a result. This is why small actions matter more than big intentions. Because your life is not shaped by what you say you will do. It is shaped by what you actually do repeatedly, especially when it is inconvenient. Now, here is where everything comes together. You do not need to wait for the perfect moment. You do not need more information. You do not need everything to be clear before you start. You already have enough to begin. What you need is to take one action and then another without constantly questioning whether it will work. Because clarity does not come before action. It comes from action. The more you move, the more you learn. The more you learn, the more you adjust. And the more you adjust, the closer you get to the result you are looking for. But none of that happens if you stay in the same place waiting for certainty. So right now, I want you to make this practical. Not tomorrow, not next week, but today. Choose one action that moves you forward. Make it clear. Make it specific. Make it something you can actually complete. And then do it. Not perfectly, not with pressure, just do it. Because the moment you act, you interrupt the old pattern. And once you interrupt it, you create space for something new. That is how change begins. Not with a massive transformation, but with a single decision followed by action. Now, before we close, I want to leave you with something that you can carry with you after this video ends. Your life is not stuck. It is responding to what you repeat. If you change what you repeat, you change what you experience. It will not happen instantly. It will not always be visible, but it will happen. And one day, you will look back and realize that the version of you who felt stuck was not permanent. It was just a phase that ended the moment you started acting differently. So wherever you are right now, whatever you are dealing with, understand this. You are not as far away as you think. You are one decision, one action, one consistent shift away from a completely different direction. And that direction starts now. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this video. I appreciate your time, your attention, and your willingness to reflect on yourself. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to apply it. That matters more than anything else. I will see you in the next video. Take care.